My daughter-in-law called me a useless old woman in our family chat, and the strangest part was that she completely forgot I was in it. I remember the moment clearly because I was sitting at my small oak kitchen table on a quiet Tuesday morning, the same table my late husband Robert had built with his own hands nearly 40 years ago. The sunlight was coming through the window over the sink, warming the coffee mug between my hands, and for a moment everything felt peaceful. Then my phone buzzed. At 71 you learn to move a little slower, so I didn't rush. I simply picked up my phone, adjusted my glasses, and opened the message notification from our family group chat. It was a group Ashley had created 2 years earlier called Colin's Family Updates, a place where birthdays were announced, photos of my granddaughter Sophie were shared, and where my son Daniel usually sent quick reminders about holiday dinners. When the message loaded, the first thing I saw was Ashley's name. Then I saw the sentence beneath it. Honestly, Daniel can't keep carrying his useless old mother forever. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the screen. The words didn't disappear. The message didn't correct itself. It just sat there, bright and plain, like a stain you can't wipe away. I noticed the little check marks under the message showing it had already been delivered to everyone. A moment later another message popped up from Ashley. She just sits there all day like she's helpless. My hands didn't shake. I didn't gasp or cry. I just leaned back slightly in my chair and read the words again, slowly this time, making sure I hadn't misunderstood something. But there was nothing to misunderstand. She had written it clearly. The strange thing was that Ashley wasn't whispering behind my back. She had typed it directly into the family chat. The same chat I was in. The same chat where my name appeared right under hers on the member list. I watched the screen quietly as the typing bubble appeared again. A moment later Daniel responded with a short message. Ashley, followed by a laughing emoji. The kind people use when they want to pretend something uncomfortable is just a joke. Another relative added a quick LOL. No one said my name. No one asked if I was reading. No one noticed the small gray icon beside my name that meant I had already seen the message. I set the phone down beside my coffee and looked out the window toward the maple tree in the backyard. Robert had planted that tree the year Daniel was born. It had grown tall over the decades, steady and patient, surviving storms that would have snapped younger branches. I took a slow sip of coffee and let the warmth settle in my chest. Ashley thought she had said something cruel about me without consequences. She thought I was just a quiet old woman who wouldn't notice. What she didn't realize yet was that I had already taken a screenshot. I did not reply to the message. I did not send an emoji or type a single word. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the table and finished the rest of my coffee slowly, the way Robert used to do on quiet mornings when there was nowhere urgent to be. Outside, a delivery truck rolled down the street, and the sound of its engine faded past the houses on our block. The ordinary calm of the neighborhood made the message feel almost unreal, like something that had slipped into the wrong story. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Then again. Curiosity finally made me turn it over. The family chat had become more active. Ashley had sent another message, this time longer. She wrote that Daniel was working too hard, and that someday he would have to make a decision about what to do with me. She said that some people refused to accept that they were getting older. I read every word carefully. Daniel replied once more with a short message that said, "Let us talk about it later," followed by another lighthearted emoji. No one mentioned that I was part of the conversation. No one said my name. The quiet certainty of that realization settled over me more strongly than the words themselves. It was not just that Ashley believed I was a burden. It was that the entire conversation happened with the assumption that I was invisible. I set the phone down again and looked around the kitchen. The clock above the stove ticked steadily toward 9 in the morning. The refrigerator hummed softly. Everything in the room had been chosen over decades of living here. The blue ceramic bowl on the counter had been a wedding gift from Robert's sister in 1982. The curtains were ones I had sewn myself after Daniel graduated from high school. This house had held every version of our family. I thought about Daniel as a little boy sitting at this same table doing his homework while I packed his lunch for the next day. I thought about the nights Robert and I stayed up late worrying about whether we were doing enough for him, whether we were giving him the kind of life we had both worked so hard to build. The strange thing was that the message from Ashley did not make me feel angry in the way people might expect. Instead, it felt like the moment when a puzzle piece finally clicks into place after years of not fitting. Small memories began to line up in my mind. The holiday dinners where Ashley insisted they host instead of coming here. The times Daniel suggested I should consider a senior living community even though I had never asked for help. The polite smiles that appeared whenever finances or property were mentioned. I reached for my phone again and opened the screenshot I had saved. The words were still there exactly as Ashley had written them. I studied the screen for a long moment before locking the phone and sliding it into my pocket. If Ashley believed I was a useless old woman, she was about to learn something important about underestimating quiet people. I slipped my phone into my coat pocket and went about the rest of my morning the same way I always did. Routine can be a powerful thing when the world shifts under your feet. I rinsed my coffee mug, wiped the kitchen counter, and watered the small basil plant that sat beside the window. The sky outside had turned a pale autumn blue, and a cool breeze moved the branches of the maple tree Robert had planted so many years ago. For a moment I stood there watching the leaves flutter and thought about how quietly time changes things. When Daniel was young, he used to climb that very tree with a rope swing his father tied to the strongest branch. I could still hear his laughter in my memory, echoing across the yard on warm summer afternoons. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, but I did not reach for it immediately. I already knew the rhythm of the conversation happening inside that group chat. Messages were still coming in, little gray notifications stacking one after another. When I finally looked, Ashley had moved on from complaining about me to discussing dinner plans for the weekend. Daniel answered politely, asking if Sunday evening would work. Someone else mentioned bringing dessert. The conversation flowed easily as if nothing uncomfortable had been said earlier that morning. The contrast was almost impressive. A person could write something cruel at 8:30 and talk about apple pie at 9 without missing a beat. I studied the screen calmly and noticed something interesting. Ashley had not deleted her earlier message. Sometimes people realize they have said something careless and quickly erase it, pretending it never existed. Ashley had done no such thing. That meant one of two things. Either she truly believed I would never see it, or she believed it did not matter if I did. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and picked up my car keys. There were errands I needed to run, and sitting in the house thinking about the message would not change anything. The grocery store was only a mile away, and the drive gave me time to think clearly. As I stopped at a red light on Maple Avenue, another memory surfaced in my mind. 2 years earlier, not long after Robert passed away, Ashley had sat across from me at the dining table during Thanksgiving dinner and said something that sounded helpful at the time. She suggested that Daniel and I should simplify things by keeping certain financial matters organized through a shared family account. She explained that it would make bills easier and allow Daniel to help if I ever needed assistance. I had nodded politely and told her I would think about it. Robert had always handled most of the financial paperwork in our marriage, but before he died, he had spent several evenings walking me through every document, every account, and every detail of the family trust. I remembered the way he spoke gently but firmly that night, telling me that understanding these things mattered more than people realized. When the light turned green, the first continued down the road and felt a quiet sense of clarity settle in my chest. Ashley believed she understood the structure of our family. She believed Daniel controlled everything important. She believed I was simply a quiet old woman who lived in the background of their lives. What she did not know was that Robert had prepared me very carefully for moments exactly like this. I finished my errands just after noon and drove home through the quiet streets of our neighborhood. The houses here were modest but well cared for, the kind of place where people waved from their driveways and children rode bicycles along the sidewalks in the summer. Robert and I had moved here when Daniel was 6 years old, back when the maple tree in our yard was barely taller than the fence. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the sunlight hitting the windows of the house in that familiar golden way it always did in early afternoon. For a moment I sat in the car with the engine off, looking at the front porch where Robert used to sit every evening with a newspaper folded across his knee. The silence of the house no longer felt lonely the way it had during the first months after he passed. Instead it felt steady, like a place where thoughts could settle clearly. Inside, I placed the groceries on the counter and took my phone out of my pocket. The family chat had grown quiet again, the earlier conversation already buried under casual messages about grocery lists and weekend plans. Ashley had sent a photo of a new set of dining chairs she wanted for the house she shared with Daniel. Someone responded that they looked expensive. Ashley replied with a smiling face and wrote that Daniel had always been generous. I read the message carefully and then locked my phone again. Ashley liked to talk about generosity when she believed the money was already within reach. I unpacked the groceries slowly and placed everything neatly into the refrigerator. The small routines of the house had a way of organizing my thoughts. While I worked, I remembered the evening Robert had shown me the documents that mattered most. It had been late, nearly 10 o'clock, and we sat together at this same kitchen table with a folder between us. Robert explained every detail in a calm voice, from the ownership of the house to the structure of the family trust. He told me that people often misunderstood how responsibility moved through a family after someone passed away. Many assumed the next generation immediately took control, but Robert had built things differently. The trust remained under my authority for as long as I wished, with clear instructions about how it could be changed and who would benefit from it in the future. At the time, I had listened carefully, but never imagined the knowledge would become important so soon. Now, standing alone in the quiet kitchen, I realized that Ashley had made a simple mistake. She believed Daniel controlled the structure of our family's finances because that is the story she had chosen to believe. She saw me as someone who simply occupied a spare room in the larger picture of their lives. What she did not understand was that the foundation of that picture had been built long before she arrived. I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator and removed the small leather folder Robert had given me. Inside were the copies of the documents he had walked me through that night. I did not rush as I read through them again. There was no need for haste. Patience had always been one of Robert's strengths, and over the years I had learned how powerful patience could be. Ashley believed she had already defined my role in the family. She had written it plainly in a message she thought I would never see. The truth was much quieter than her assumption, but it was also far more permanent. I closed the leather folder and returned it carefully to the drawer where it had always been kept. Robert believed important things should never be hidden in dramatic places. He used to say that the safest location for something valuable was often the most ordinary drawer in the house. I stood there for a moment with my hand resting on the counter, thinking about how many small assumptions people build their lives on without realizing it. Ashley believed I depended on Daniel. Daniel believed that everything Robert left behind had quietly transferred into his hands when the funeral ended, and perhaps in some ways that belief had made life easier for them. When people think they already understand a situation, they rarely ask deeper questions. My phone buzzed again on the table. This time the message was not from the family group chat. It was from my granddaughter Sophie. Her name appeared on the screen along with a short message asking if I was home. I smiled before even opening it. Sophie had always been the one member of the family who noticed things others missed. When she was younger, she used to sit beside Robert during Sunday mornings while he read the newspaper, asking him endless questions about the world. Robert adored that about her. I replied that I was home and that she was welcome to visit any time. Less than 20 minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of a car door closing outside and footsteps coming up the front walk. When Sophie entered the kitchen, she looked around in the thoughtful way she always had, as if studying the room before speaking. She set her backpack down beside the chair and sat at the table across from me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she reached into her pocket and placed her phone on the table between us. The screen was already open to the family chat conversation from earlier that morning. I recognized the message immediately. Sophie looked at me with a mixture of concern and determination that reminded me very much of Robert. She said quietly that she had seen the messages when they appeared and that she had wondered whether I had seen them too. I told her that I had. The words hung in the quiet kitchen for a moment before Sophie nodded slowly. She explained that this was not the first time Ashley had spoken that way when she believed certain people were not paying attention. Sometimes it happened during phone calls, sometimes during family gatherings when conversations drifted into private corners. Sophie said she never liked it, but she never knew what to do about it. I listened carefully without interrupting her. When she finished speaking, the room felt even quieter than before. I reached over and gently slid her phone back toward her. I told her that sometimes people reveal more about themselves when they believe no one important is listening. Sophie studied my face for a moment, perhaps expecting anger or sadness. Instead, I simply gave her a small smile. Robert used to say that patience often tells you more about a situation than confrontation ever will. Sophie asked softly what I planned to do. I looked toward the window where the maple tree moved gently in the afternoon breeze and answered honestly that I was not in a hurry. Some lessons take time to arrive, and when they do, they tend to be much clearer for everyone involved. After Sophie left that afternoon, the house returned to its quiet rhythm. The sun had shifted lower in the sky and long shadows stretched across the kitchen floor. I washed the 2 glasses we had used and placed them carefully in the drying rack beside the sink. There was something comforting about the familiar sound of water running and dishes settling back into their place. Small routines often give people time to think more clearly than long conversations ever could. I dried my hands with a towel and glanced at my phone resting on the counter. The family chat had gone quiet again. For a moment I considered opening it, but there was no need. I already knew everything important that had been said there. Instead, I picked up the leather folder once more and carried it into the small study at the front of the house. Robert had used that room for years when he managed the family accounts and paperwork. His desk was still exactly the way he left it, with a small brass lamp in the corner and a framed photograph of Daniel as a boy standing beside the maple tree in the yard. I sat down slowly and opened the folder again, turning each page with the careful attention Robert had taught me. The documents were clear and simple when read patiently. The house belonged to the family trust. The trust remained under my authority for as long as I chose. Any changes to its structure required my approval and my signature. Robert had always believed that stability in a family came from thoughtful planning rather than quick decisions. As I read the pages again, I realized how easily people confuse silence with weakness. Ashley saw my quiet habits and assumed they meant I was unaware of the larger picture. Daniel, in his own way, had begun to believe the same thing. It was not entirely his fault. When someone grows up watching their parents manage everything around them, they often assume the details will simply pass down without question. But Robert had built our plans with more care than that. I closed the folder gently and placed it back on the desk. Outside the window, the afternoon breeze moved through the maple tree again, its branches shifting slowly in the soft light. For many years, that tree had been a place where Daniel played and where Robert and I watched the seasons change together. Now it seemed to stand quietly as a reminder of how long patience can last. I reached into my pocket and looked at the screenshot I had saved earlier that morning. The words were still there, unchanged and perfectly clear. Ashley believed her message would fade into the background of a busy conversation. She believed time would carry it away before anyone important noticed. I studied the screen for another moment before locking the phone and placing it beside the folder on Robert's desk. Sometimes the most powerful response to a careless statement is simply waiting for the right moment. And for the first time since that message appeared on my screen, I could feel that moment slowly beginning to take shape. I woke the next morning a little earlier than usual. The sky outside my bedroom window was still pale gray, the kind of quiet early light that makes the whole neighborhood feel like it is holding its breath. For many years, Robert used to wake at this hour to make coffee before the rest of the house stirred. And sometimes I still imagined I could hear the soft sound of the kettle warming on the stove. Old habits remain even when the people who started them are gone. I dressed slowly and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, pausing for a moment beside the framed photographs that lined the wall. There was Daniel at 8 years old holding a baseball glove almost bigger than his arm. There was Robert standing proudly beside the maple tree the day it first grew taller than the roofline. Families leave behind quiet markers of time like that. Each photograph tells a story about who we once believed we were going to be. In the kitchen, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the same oak table where everything had begun 2 mornings earlier. The house was completely silent except for the ticking of the clock above the stove. I unlocked my phone and opened the family chat again, not because I expected anything new, but because sometimes it is important to see how people behave after they believe their words have disappeared into the past. Overnight, Ashley had sent several messages about a dinner she wanted to host that coming Sunday. She wrote that it would be nice for everyone to gather since it had been a while since the whole family sat down together. Daniel responded that he would bring a bottle of wine. A cousin offered to bring dessert. The conversation looked cheerful and ordinary, as though the earlier message about me had never existed. I studied the screen quietly while the coffee cooled in my hand. There is something fascinating about how easily people rewrite their own memories when it suits them. Ashley had not mentioned her earlier words, and no one else had brought them up. Perhaps she assumed that time had erased them. Perhaps she believed silence meant permission. I set the phone down and looked toward the maple tree through the kitchen window. The branches moved gently in the morning breeze, and the leaves shimmered in the rising sunlight. That tree had stood in our yard longer than Ashley had even known Daniel. It had watched every stage of our family without speaking a single word. I thought about the invitation for Sunday dinner and felt a calm certainty settle over me. If Ashley wanted the entire family gathered in one place, then she had unknowingly chosen the perfect moment for certain truths to be seen clearly. I finished the last sip of coffee and rose from the table, already knowing that patience had brought everything exactly where it needed to be. Sunday arrived with the kind of calm weather that made the whole neighborhood look polished and orderly. The sky was bright and clear, and the maple tree in the yard moved gently in a soft afternoon breeze. I took my time getting ready before leaving the house. There was no reason to rush. Patience had carried the week exactly where it needed to go. Before I stepped outside, I checked my purse to make sure everything was there. My phone rested in the side pocket, the screenshot still saved exactly where I had left it. The leather folder containing the documents remained safely at home in Robert's desk, but the knowledge inside those papers was already enough. The drive to Daniel and Ashley's house took about 15 minutes, the same quiet route I had traveled many times for birthdays, holidays, and Sunday dinners over the years. When I pulled into their driveway, several cars were already parked along the curb. Through the front window, I could see people moving around inside, setting plates on the table and carrying dishes from the kitchen. Laughter drifted faintly through the open door as I walked up the path. Ashley greeted me with the same bright smile she always used when guests were present. She stepped forward and gave me a quick hug before ushering me inside. Her voice carried across the living room as she announced that everyone had finally arrived. The house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Daniel stood near the dining table talking with one of his cousins, holding a glass of wine in his hand. When he saw me, he smiled warmly and asked how I had been. I answered politely and took a seat at the table while the last dishes were placed in the center. The conversation moved easily from one topic to another. People talked about work, about school schedules, about the unusually warm weather we had been having for October. Ashley laughed often and moved around the table, making sure everyone had what they needed. Anyone watching would have believed the evening was perfectly ordinary. I noticed Sophie sitting quietly across from me, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before she looked down at her plate. She did not say anything, but she did not need to. The room slowly filled with the gentle sound of forks against plates and the low hum of conversation. For a while I simply listened. Eventually Ashley leaned back in her chair and began talking about how busy Daniel had been lately. She said that he worked harder than anyone she knew and that it was not easy managing responsibilities for so many people at once. Her tone was light and conversational, the kind people use when they expect agreement from everyone in the room. Several heads nodded politely. Daniel gave a small laugh and shrugged as if the idea embarrassed him. Ashley added that families sometimes had to make practical decisions about the future, especially when older relatives needed more support than they realized. The words floated gently through the room and settled into the quiet spaces between conversations. I placed my fork down beside my plate and reached calmly into my purse. The phone felt cool in my hand as I unlocked the screen. For a moment, I looked around the table at the familiar faces of the family that Robert and I had built together. Then I turned the phone so the screen faced Ashley and spoke in the same calm voice I had used all evening. I said that sometimes people forget who is listening when they choose their words. The room grew quiet the moment I turned the phone toward Ashley. For a few seconds no one spoke, because most people assumed I was about to show a photograph or a message about the dinner plans. Ashley leaned slightly forward in her chair with the same confident smile she had worn all evening, but the expression changed the moment she recognized the screen. I did not raise my voice or move dramatically. I simply held the phone where she could see it clearly. The message sat there exactly as she had written it days earlier. The words were plain and unedited. Daniel looked from my face to the screen and then back again, the easy expression he had worn earlier slowly fading into confusion. One of the cousins leaned closer to read it as well, and the quiet hum of conversation that had filled the room only moments earlier disappeared completely. Ashley blinked once, then twice, as if her mind was trying to rearrange what she was seeing into something less certain. I rested the phone gently on the table so everyone sitting nearby could read the message if they wished. I told them calmly that sometimes people say things when they believe the right person is not listening. I explained that this particular message had appeared in a place where I could read it very clearly. Daniel picked up the phone and studied the screen with a seriousness I had not seen in him for a long time. His eyes moved slowly across each word. The room remained silent except for the faint sound of the ceiling fan turning above us. Ashley opened her mouth once as if she intended to explain something, but no words came out immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than it had been all evening. She said that the message had been misunderstood and that it was meant as a joke between family members. I nodded gently as if I were considering the possibility. Then I told her that jokes often depend on who is expected to laugh. The words hung quietly in the air. I could see Daniel reading the message again, his expression tightening slightly as the meaning settled in. For a long moment, no one at the table moved. Then I reached for my purse and stood up slowly from my chair. I said that I did not come to dinner to argue with anyone and that I had no intention of raising my voice in someone else's home. I simply believe that when words are written plainly, they deserve to be seen plainly as well. I looked at Daniel for a moment and reminded him that families are built on the way people speak about one another when they believe the other person is not present. The room remained quiet as I stepped away from the table and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Sophie's chair slide back slightly as she rose as well. Outside, the evening air felt cool and calm, and the streetlights had just begun to glow along the sidewalk. As I walked to my car, I realized something Robert once told me had always been true. Patience rarely raises its voice, but when it finally speaks, people tend to remember the moment very clearly.